Well, hello everyone. I am Jason Tripp, and I want to thank you for joining us for week one of Movies for Lent, conversations at the intersection of faith and film. Given that this week we observed Ash Wednesday, marking the beginning of the 7-week journey of Lent, our theme for this first week is mortality. And the film we have chosen to view and interact with is the film Arrival from 2016. It's a movie adaptation from the short story 1998 by Ted Chiang entitled The Story of Your Life. Arrival is directed by French-Canadian director par excellence, Denis Villeneuve, whose other works include Blade Runner 2049, Sicario, Prisoners, Incendie, and the recently released tiny little film you may have heard of called Dune. The hope is that as we view and discuss each film in conversation with the weekly lectionary readings, our Lenten experience and our lives will be enriched. So before I pass things over to my friend, colleague, and fellow cinephile, Adam Kline, he's going to share some thoughts on this week's theme and film that he adores. I want to read a portion of this week's gospel reading from the lectionary from the Gospel of Matthew, Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 to 21, and I'm reading from the New Living Translation. And it reads, "Don't store up treasures here on earth, where moths eat them and rust destroys them, and where thieves break in and steal. Store your treasures in heaven, where moths and rust cannot destroy, and thieves do not break in and steal. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be." Adam and I are both big fans of Denis Villeneuve, and we agreed that this film, his film Arrival, would be just the perfect film to interact with, given the theme of mortality on Ash Wednesday. So, Adam, I know this is your personal favorite film of Denis Villeneuve, holds a special place in your heart. So I'm going to play the role of kind of the golf caddy tonight. So I'll tee up the ball for you. I'll hand you a club, and you can take a big swing away. So maybe you can just share with us some of your thoughts on the film and how it dovetails with the theme of mortality and with the gospel reading that we just heard from Matthew.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Jason. Hey, everyone. And to everyone listening, appreciate you joining us for this. It's nice to know, Jason and I, it's just nice to know that we're not alone, that we're not the only weirdos out there obsessed with analyzing the artistry and the narrative of film, and happy to have some friends with us. I don't know about you guys, but today is a pretty significant day in my spiritual journey. Today being Ash Wednesday. For more than a millennia, it's been the traditional start for the season of Lent for Christians all around the world. But maybe like many of you, maybe for myself, I didn't grow up with Ash Wednesday. I didn't really grow up knowing much about Lent, to be honest, or the ancient traditions of seasonal fasting or prayerfully preparing for Easter weekend and Resurrection Sunday. I grew up in a fairly typical evangelical Wesleyan Methodist congregation. And so it wasn't really until college that I started to learn about the specifics of liturgy and the rich tapestry that is the liturgical arts. And when I did finally participate in an Ash Wednesday service for the very first time, I gotta be honest, my life and my understanding of what worship was forever changed, sincerely. It was like all of a sudden the lights were turned on, and I could see myself as a link in the chain, a chain that went all the way back in time and also was moving all the way forward. It was like all of a sudden my life and momentary existence, that my journey of following Jesus was actually part and connected to something much grander and greater and more glorious than I could imagine or fathom. And in many ways, that's exactly what Ash Wednesday is all about. Understanding and accepting our own limitations and mortality, not in any morose or morbid way, but in humility and with thanksgiving, because I am not the author of my own story. I am a grateful participant in an ongoing narrative of creation, redemption, and reconciliation. I'm a stage player in the grand cosmic theater where creativity and collaboration are integral to the narrative and the nature of the Holy Trinity. And so you and I, we are stage players alongside billions of fellow participants who are all asked, or better yet, presented with a problem or a parable. Will you store up treasures in your own tiny, time-bound corner of this stage, or will you build up and share in the timeless treasures available to you across this eternal theater? At least that's how I like to paraphrase the words of Jesus from Matthew chapter 6. Are you really going to try to be the author and creator of your own story with all of the anxieties and limitations and loneliness that such efforts would bring? Or will you choose to surrender your worry, surrender and accept your mortality in the face of all inevitability, knowing that the small section of stage that you stand upon is but a link in the chain, one sequence in an ongoing eternal narrative shared between Father, Son, and Holy Spirit? And for me, these are just some of the thoughts that come to mind when I reflect on Denis Villeneuve's masterpiece, Arrival, during this first week of Lent. In the face of a cosmic stage, in the face of a reality far greater than any of our own knowledge or knowing, the human race, as presented in this film and story, is plagued by fear, anxiety, and worry, and must choose to trust or destroy one another. They must choose to stay in communication with one another and do the hard work of seeking unity. And similarly, in the face of an ever-evolving vision or revelation, ever-evolving reality that will include inevitable suffering and death, our protagonist in the film, played by Amy Adams, must choose to accept the life and the love of another into her story, no matter how short a time they might end up sharing. You see, because in the face of our own mortality, we must choose. In the face of all inevitabilities, we must decide. This narrative of ours has an arc. The author and perfecter of faith has prepared an ending and has revealed that ending through his resurrection. But how we get there, or if we arrive there, is really up to us. More recently, when I rewatch Arrival, because as Jason said, it is a favorite of mine, I can't help but also think of the 2004 film Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, starring Jim Carrey, because at the end of that film, the two main characters, even though they know that the future of their relationship will include strife and suffering, they still choose to love and embrace one another. And it makes me think also, of course, of my favorite theologian, the late, great Robert Jensen, who said that because we are created in the image of a communal Trinity, a divine nature that speaks our narrative into existence, because the human species is made in their image, as Scripture says, we all crave dramatic coherence. That's how Jensen puts it, that we crave dramatic coherence. And you can call it closure, you can call it catharsis, or whatever you want to call it, but we live and we choose to go on living in spite of inevitable suffering and death, because we're wired for more than survival. We're made for meaning. All of time may be relative, but in answer to the question written upon that whiteboard in the middle of the movie, we know our purpose is to give and to receive love. And so that's also my prayer and my pursuit this season of Lent.
Thanks, Adam. That's good stuff. And I guess if we stick with the golf analogy for a few more minutes, I think you drove the green there, and I'll see if I can tap in a little putt for birdie here. So just a brief response and to add to what was well said. I know we've had a chance to talk personally, you and I, about this movie in particular and the films of Denis Villeneuve at large over the past year. And if I'm honest, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship, or have in the past, with this film. There's so much to love in this film. Everything Adam has expressed. Cinematically, it's fantastic. The performances are wonderful. But if I'm honest, sometimes I bristle at films like this, which suggest sort of a deterministic view of the world, which can suggest the world is devoid of authentic free will. And if that was a deterrent for others here tonight, I just want to say that, I mean, maybe others noticed a bit of the paradox in the film, and the key question that Louise, Amy Adams' character, asks Ian, Jeremy Renner, near the end of the film. Spoiler alert, if you could see your whole life from start to finish, would you change things? You know, of course, the paradox is that if there are future events that we know about in the present, then that implies that there is some sort of divine blueprint or coercive force pushing us towards those settled future events, which can essentially mean that our free will is illusionary. Choices have no meaning if the future is fully settled and fully known. So that being said, this time when I revisited Arrival, I tried very hard just to put aside that particular frustration I have, and that might be unique to me, with the determinism in the film, and simply to focus on the journey of Louise and Ian as it relates to the theme tonight of mortality. And the result was a much more enjoyable experience rewatching this film. What jumped out this time for me was around the ways in which Louise and Ian, those two main characters, sort of embodied different trajectories that our lives can take in the wake of coming to grips with the inevitability of our mortality and impending death of ourselves and our loved ones. Throughout the film, we witness Louise moving on a journey from fear of her routines becoming unsettled. In one of the most poignant scenes of the film, which is very rich with metaphor, we witness our once terrified linguistic professor protagonist, bravely removing her hazmat suit in an emotional encounter with the heptapods. This scene and others throughout the film imply a life that is moving from fear of life and fear of death and fear of change to embracing the inevitability of our mortality and living a life of self-sacrificial love. On the other hand, near the end of the film, we are informed that when Louise tells her husband, Ian, of her newfound gift of seeing the future, including her prescient knowledge of the inevitable tragic death of their daughter from a rare disease, his response is one of anger, fear, and withdrawal in the face of mortality and the impending death of their daughter. And so Arrival has a lot for us to contemplate as we navigate our world and as we begin this journey of Lent. Though we have not in our world witnessed the arrival of alien ships around the globe, what we have witnessed is the arrival of a global pandemic, which has forced all of humanity to come to grips with our own frailty and our mortality. And of course, as we all know, the responses echoing those of Louise and Ian have been a mixture of love and fear. We've seen the sacrificial love of frontline healthcare workers and countless others in the face of disease and death on a global scale. But we've also witnessed angry protests, social media tirades, anti-government sentiments, and polarization in families, faith communities, and nations, which have left our world feeling quite fragmented and fractured. And so as we begin this journey of Lent and contemplate our own mortality and frailty, we have the opportunity to live with humility, empathy, and self-sacrificial love, focusing on what truly matters and will ultimately transcend our mortality. As the Apostle Paul reminds us in 1 Corinthians 13, now these things remain. These three things remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love.